Speaking of the Labour Party and their links to working people and the trade union movement, today, scurrilous rumours had been proven to be true. Did you know, chat? The Labour Party is funded by the trade unions? Shock! Revelations have come out that some MPs might have been given trade union funding to run for Parliament. Crazy. Crazy, I know. Absolutely crazy. That trade unions might fund the party that's supposed to represent organised labour in government. And by supposed to, I mean not really, because they're not doing so at the moment, necessarily. But this has come from the fact that Labour have agreed some pay deals with some trade unions, including ASLEF, who are affiliated to the Labour Party, to try and stop strike action. Because, it costs more to continue strike action that's unnecessary than it is just to come to a pay agreement anyway, so that there's no sunk cost fallacy here. And on top of that, these people deserve their wages regardless of whether the unions are affiliated or not. And of course, on top of that, union money is incredibly clean money because it comes from the democratic will of a union member base funded by union donation. So it's not exactly a scandal or corrupt that the trade unions fund Labour and then Labour when in government make sure that they get pay rises. Like, not exactly rocket science that might happen. But the media are mad about this. They're absolutely mad about this and thinking that Labour are being quote-unquote soft on strikers. Now, James Schneider, of Progressive International fame and used to be advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, was on Good Morning Britain today debating some Conservative advisor person and Richard Madeley, Alan Partridge impressionist supreme. So we're going to have a watch and see what they have to say.
Trade unions could well be handed greater powers to strike if new government reforms go ahead under Angela Rayner. The repeal of existing laws would mean a majority would no longer be needed to support industrial action. That's something the Tories say would open the floodgates to even more strikes.
Well, since coming into power, Labour has been quick to try to settle public sector pay disputes, already agreeing to a raft of recommended pay rises, including an increase of around 22% for junior doctors over 2 years.
As we know, train drivers from ASLEF were handed an increase of more than 14% over 3 years. This year, armed forces personnel are going to get a 6% increase, and NHS staff and teachers have accepted 5.5%.
Civil servants will get 5% and police officers 4.7%.
And these increases, confirmed, of course, by the Chancellor, are estimated to be worth about 9.4 billion quid. However...
Again, that's not a huge amount of money in terms of public spending, and it's not insubstantial. It's a reasonable amount, but it's not, huge to be able to settle these disputes.
Literally a communist.
And it's really interesting to me that what the rightoids are mad about is the idea that people who are incredibly important to the functionality of our society, such as doctors and nurses and firefighters, all of that lot, are getting pay increases from the government. Yeah, I'm sure you're going to find many allies across the country who think it's bad to see nurses get a pay rise or doctors get a pay rise. But they hate the unions so much, they'll try and make you hate doctors and nurses over it.
A little less than 48 hours after the train drivers' union, ASLEF, agreed to a 14.25% pay increase, they then announced 3 more months of industrial action. Not about pay, though, about conditions.
And that's specifically against the train operating company LNER, which is owned by the Operator of Last Resort. So that's technically a state-owned entity, but it's a very specific dispute with that operator on LNER rather than across the whole network, which was a pay dispute. So he's right to say that.
Has the government been a bit soft with the strikers?
Well, we're joined by a former advisor to Jeremy Corbyn, James Schneider, who says disputes are being settled by a government willing to negotiate, and also former special advisor to Boris Johnson, Oscar Redrop, who says the government are giving in too easily. Well, we know that you would say that, Oscar, wouldn't you? Because the government didn't give in at all. The last government didn't get round the table and people were fed up.
People were fed up, and I remember it very well. It was 2022, the summer of discontent. Mitt Lynch was a hugely, hugely powerful, persuasive speaker at the time. Mm-hmm. And polling amongst the public at that moment in time, they were very much on side with the strikers. Mm-hmm. However, 2 years have passed now, and I think that public opinion polling that you'll see, and it'd be nice to see some refreshed polling on it that comes out over the next few months, I think that has shifted and it has changed. I get what the Labour Party are doing now they're in government. They want to go, look how terrible the Tories were, nothing ever got solved, all the problems that we can just click our fingers and solve. But I really think there's a strategic naivety there.
Yeah,
because it's a domino effect.
There had to be a settlement, didn't there? I mean, the rail strikes have been going on and on and on. People were sick of them, commuters in particular, who need to use the trains
And there's a reason why the train dispute in particular was intractable. Not just because the government tried to keep scuttling the deal by imposing conditions that were never going to be acceptable to the RMT and ASLEF, but they were indemnifying the train operating companies so they didn't actually have to come and solve the dispute because they were making their money anyway. There was only one honest negotiating partner, and that was the trade unions.
All the time.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, even if they're on the right of the centre in terms of politics, wouldn't see basically 5% over 3 years, 5%, 5%, 5%. It's particularly excessive. They might see it as money well spent to kill the dispute.
Well, to kill the dispute for the time being, and that's the really, really crucial point. And the thing that is often forgotten, I think, when we talk about pay disputes, industrial action, is the millions of people who are sat around their breakfast tables right now watching this, who are not part of a union, who are just cracking on, trying to make the best of life as they can. And often they are completely removed from the conversation, and they are at the front line of the services that they often don't receive.
Are you arguing for union?
Yeah, Kate about to say what he's essentially implying here. He's trying to divide and rule. He's trying to divide and rule by saying, oh, well, all you ununionised people, aren't you mad at the unionised people for getting paid more than you, for actually having wage increases while you're stuck on your crappy wages? I'm like, yeah, there's an argument to them to get unionised. That's what they should be doing. If they want the same ability to collectively bargain, they should also join unions as well.
Representation in all areas, because it sounded a little bit like that was
no, good idea.
James, though, let's come to you. Resolving strikes, the public we know wants, and got very cross that the Conservative Party didn't manage to do it. Labour's now in government. Why pick now to do this? Because isn't it playing into the hands of those who say Labour's in hock to the unions anyway, and all we're doing in Britain is playing into the hands of the strikers and being soft on them?
So these are all long-running pay disputes, and the pay bodies that come up which recommend how much pay should go up has come out with the recommendations. So now is the time to settle them rather than prolong industrial action. And what we're talking about here is issues that have been built up over 14 years of year-on-year pay cuts for nurses, for the armed forces, for doctors, for teachers.
Yeah, but Kate's question is, why repeal the 2016 Trade Union Act? What's the point?
Because it's a very strange piece of legislation which, for example, makes all trade unions have to have their elections by post. When it's 2024, we can do things online. It's a restrictive thing. Now, let's look.
Yeah, but it also, hang on, you say it's very strange, and the postal thing is, I think that's a fair point. But it also says that you need at least 50% of the membership to take part in the poll. What's wrong with that?
So, again...
poll for a strike.
It's made in a...
I mean, we don't cancel an electoral result if turnout is too low. We don't go at an election and say, oh, well, only 45% of people turned up for this council election in the electorate, so we're going to have to no, you're not allowed to get elected. We don't turn down democratic results elsewhere for not having high enough turnout. Why should it be like that in trade unions? It doesn't make any sense.
In a restrictive way, because it's hard to get people to do postal voting in an age where it's online. If it were online with a threshold, then you could have an argument about it. Now, what is a strike? A strike is when ordinary people, workers, get together in their organisation, which is called a trade union, and they take the last step of action in a dispute. Because if we've seen with nurses and doctors, they've had massive pay cuts in real terms over the last 14 years. They're worried about safe staffing levels. There's a big retention crisis. And it's the last step that they can take to say, we can't put up with this anymore. And I agree with what Oscar said. Everybody should be able to be in a trade union. If you're sitting at home and watching this and go, I think a 5% pay rise would be reasonable. I've had year-on-year pay cuts every year. The answer to that is join a trade union. Find your fellow workers and join a union.
Because actually...
And that's 100% why I think that it's good for the trade union movement that we have these high-profile success stories in terms of negotiating with the government and indeed with employers. Like, we're seeing union recognition potentially in Amazon warehouses, lots of terrible stories coming out of Amazon very specifically, and a trade union is going to be beneficial, but loads of other disputes being solved by union action. It's a good advertisement. Trade unionism on the whole. If we as trade unionists can go to ununionized people and say, look, I get that you're upset about other people getting wage rises when you're not. The solution is, of course, to join a union. And now you have even extra powers to be able to do that with the repeal of the 2016 Trade Union Act. The Green Party Trade Union Group has called for the removal of all of the Trade Union Acts since 1979, and I would agree with them. And the further we go, the better things get. But the more high profile the union success rate is, the more it makes it easier for us to look at people and go, look, under 25s in this country, union density is below 9%, right? If you want to get the same pay rises as everybody else, joining a union and collectively bargaining is the only way you're going to be able to do that. If you're not bargaining, you're begging. And when was the last time you saw a businessman, a business owner, give money to the homeless for begging? You know, it's not difficult to wrap your head around.
The train drivers settled pay, that was important to them. But also, it's important for all of us who, for instance, use the network to have safety as a concern.
No, of course. And this will be the real test. And this is why I say strategically from the Labour Party, the Labour government at this moment in time, this could prove really challenging for them, because understandably, 99% of the population at this moment in time will go, well, if they're getting the quid, you know, I want the pro here, you know, the T's and C's attached to it. Am I going to see a better service if we settle this dispute?
Why should it need a better service? I mean, we should get a better service by investing in the rail network and by nationalising it to get rid of all the problems that privatisation caused. But people are working and doing a job, and they deserve to ensure that they have pay restoration, especially after a period of very large inflation. That's all this is. It is pay restoration, not a pay rise. They've not had pay increases in years and years, especially train drivers, for example. And their terms and conditions are better than a lot of other people's because they're unionised. The idea that a pay rise or a pay restoration must therefore come with service improvements from the staff, rather than having a better run rail network, say, I don't know, by making sure the train operating companies do a better job of this natural monopoly they have no incentive to do a better job on, that would be a much better use of the discussion here, rather than saying, but they've not done anything to earn their pay increase, just like nobody else has done. Yeah, because everybody else should be able to have their pay increase with inflation as well. Simple as that.
But so much of this is about perception, isn't it?
Skeptical.
I mean, there is a broad perception, not held by everybody, but certainly quite a large section of the press this morning, that what we're seeing here is payback, that the trade unions bankrolled over half of Labour MPs' campaigns in the last election, and this is now the back being scratched in return.
It's not surprising that the billionaire-owned media is opposed to workers getting a fair deal. I mean, again, what we've seen here is workers who've had year on year real-term pay cuts, which has been damaging to these services. If you look at staff morale levels and safe staffing levels in the NHS, those have all been hit by having a retention crisis and low staff morale. Paying people properly improves morale and will improve the service.
But to come back to the Trade Union Act, you made the point that the voting system and the restrictions on voting are a real issue. Well, why not just tinker with it? Why actually repeal the whole thing? Why not just tinker with the voting system to make the voting system easier for people to take part in?
So I don't think it should be made more difficult for workers to take action to defend themselves. Before 2015, before this act came in, it's not like there was a wave of these unreasonable strike actions. It should be made as, easy, relatively easy, for workers to come together and say, we don't like this harassment or this bullying or this underpaying, and we want to improve our pay and our conditions and therefore the service that we can provide to our customers or to citizens.
But there will be members.
And again, in loads of public sectors, the strikes were necessary to save the service. The BMA and the nurses specifically said this. We're not just going on strike for ourselves, we're going on strike for everybody. Because if pay and retention isn't solved, the NHS will die. And so they deliberately made sure that they were engaging in industrial action to protect the interests of the wider public at large. This is not just about an individual dispute, this is about, broadly, the state of the public services and the state of retention in staffing. But it's also, this is the bulwark of the fight against the casualisation of the workforce. Fighting for terms and conditions is almost more important than fighting for higher pay or for pay restoration in a world in which you look at Sweden, for example. You look at Sweden, where Elon Musk has got an 8-month dispute going with IF Metall, one of the auto workers' unions in Sweden. And because they have much more liberal trade union rules in Sweden, they allow things like secondary picketing. which is illegal in the UK under Trade Union Act. Secondary picketing, meaning the people who aren't directly related to the workplace that is having a union dispute, can show solidarity by taking action that also is striking against that particular employer. So in Sweden, the dock workers and the postal service workers are engaging in secondary picketing by refusing to deliver Tesla parts to the Swedish Tesla factory with the dispute currently ongoing between IF Metall and Tesla. Why do you think Elon Musk is desperate to make everybody hate unions and hates the Democratic Party for being more pro-union in a post-Bernie, post-Tim Walz world? It's because Elon Musk wants to kneecap the unions because he finally had to deal with them for the first time when opening a factory in Sweden where collective and sectoral bargaining agreements rule the roost. And this war has made him absolutely despise the idea of the unions. He said that the unions make a lords and peasants hierarchy. No, that's bourgeois versus proletariat. That's the internal division of labour under capitalism between those who own and those who work, those who buy labour and those who sell labour. The lords and serfs argument is about the capitalist system, not the trade unions. Again, trying to pit worker against worker and unionised against non-unionised, as capitalists will always want to do. And because he's been bitten by this, he's lashing out against even the slightest whiff of pro-trade union policy from the Democratic Party in America. And this is why Swedish workers have better terms and conditions and better pay than we do. It's because they go on strike, it's because their trade union laws allow them to show solidarity with their other workers, and they have a collective worker movement to protect themselves, rather than an atomised and alienated society who can only think in terms of themselves rather than broader collective movements for better pay for everybody and better terms and conditions for everybody. It's the reason why the gig economy is shit here and the vocation economy is much better in Denmark, for example. It's because they have higher trade union representation. And why you at home should join a trade union.
Of the public now who will see these stories and they will be concerned that, in effect, and I don't care really how you shake it, it will be easier to go on strike in this country. And that will make service users, understandably, wary and nervous of that.
Only if we have a government or if we have employers who want to run out union disputes. It is an artifact of the fact that we had a Conservative government for 14 years, that so many of these industrial disputes lasted a very, very long time. It's because they wanted people to hate the trade unions. It is a political necessity for Labour, optically, to solve these disputes. People get paid more, terms and conditions are protected. People around the country can see that trade unions win you better wages, it wins you better workers' rights, and they will go to join them as well. And the government can say, look, we are being fiscally prudent. The Conservative Party shat away millions of pounds on keeping the strikes going with no reason whatsoever. We have solved them, and if it had gone for another 6 months, it would have cost the economy even more than what we are at paying them extra in terms of wages, at least in the next year of government receipts. This is why they're so desperate to attack trade unions and try and divide people like he has done here. Or people are worried about more strikes. There'll only be more strikes if the government or private companies treat workers like shit. How many strikes do you remember from the Blair administration? Very few.
But
maybe that's the plan of it. Maybe that's the plan of it.
We are where we are. We've got a Labour government now, and Labour and the unions symbiotically have always, from the very beginning, had a close relationship. It's just the reality of our politics.
And it's a balancing act, because I do think most, generally speaking, good, decent people want good, decent workers to be treated well with dignity and respected at work. But I think over the next few months and years, we may see Labour tip that balance too far the other way.
We will see.
Well, we will see. Good to speak to both of you this morning.
Yeah, the balance of people getting paid fairly and correctly. The balance they've gotten wrong is not having long, protracted trade union disputes that hamper out industries, cost more money than it would be to solve the dispute, and make everybody upset in the long run. Yeah, that's not going too far the other direction. That's just managing a country. That's what you have to do when you manage a country. You have to make sure that the public aren't inconvenienced. And you can do that by solving union disputes through a negotiated settlement, which the government have done. And I will, in this very rare case, applaud them for their good work. Simple as that. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.